Shelley and Warner. At the age of 15, Shelley and Warner resided in Mishawaka, Indiana with her mother, Kathleen Warner. She attended Mishawaka High School, participated in athletics, and played in the band. She said goodbye to her mother on June 16, 1980, and drove her 1973 orange Volkswagen just 2 kilometers away to Wilt's store. But she never made it back home as the day wore on. Concerned, her mother called the police. At first, the police believed she might be a missing person or a runaway. However, the case took a terrifying turn as the clock approached the 24-hour mark. The investigators changed their approach and classified the case as potentially abduction. Officers raced to the Wilt supermarket and began questioning staff members who could clearly recall Shelley and making a 1:30 p.m. grocery purchase the day before. Witnesses described Shelley and's disappearance from the business in a disturbing way. Witnesses clearly recalled seeing Shelley and drive away from the store at 2 p.m. and towards her parked car, which was only 50 feet from the front door. But then something unsettling happened. Shelley Ann was in the driver's seat when a man quickly walked up to her car and opened the driver's side door. Witnesses recalled her astonished, almost scared expression. Shelley Ann moved to the passenger side as the man boldly climbed into the driver's seat. Sadly, the witnesses were unable to determine whether or not he was carrying a firearm because he had his back to them. The orange Volkswagen Beetle rolled along Lincoln Way and headed east. And with that, Shelley M. Warner disappeared into thin air, leaving a bewildered town and detectives frantically trying to piece together the odd series of events. The man was described by witnesses as being between the ages of 16 and 18, standing 5 feet, 7 inches tall, and weighing approximately 130 pounds. Witnesses provided a thorough description of the individual, highlighting his distinct traits that set him out from the crowd, including his medium-length blonde hair and matching blonde mustache. Suspicion had been raised regarding the man's intentions when he was seen loitering about the store prior to the kidnapping. The man may have been dropped off by a friend or hitchhiked to the store, according to the store employees' speculations. Crime Stoppers, law enforcement, and Michiana painstakingly recreated the scene, publishing a suspect sketch in the hopes of eliciting information. Though several suggestions were made, none yielded the vital discovery that the detectives sorely desired. A park and shop establishment in Osceola, Indiana, was where Shelley Ann's automobile was discovered a few days later. Strangely, there were no indications of conflict within the car. Investigators concluded that the culprit may have left the automobile there in order to avoid being apprehended and carry out his evil plans. The unrelenting pursuit of solutions persisted, but the enigmatic circumstances surrounding Shelley and Warner's disappearance only grew more complex with each new development. A large search and rescue effort was launched, using search dogs, volunteers, and helicopters to thoroughly search the whole area. The 15-year-old went missing, and despite intensive search efforts, there was no sign of him. 10 excruciating days later, 2 females strolling through a forest discovered a depressing and gloomy scene. They discovered a crumbling sadly. It was determined that Shelley Ann Warner, the missing adolescent, was the owner of the lifeless body. Her body was left in a valley, half-clothed. The forensic analysis exposed a terrifying reality. Twice, Shelley had been brutally shot at close range. Her body had been severely damaged by one shot, and her head had been punctured by another. Kathleen Warner, the girl's mother, lost all hope when she learned of the horrific murder that had taken the life of a lively little child. According to autopsy results, Shelley Ann's body was abandoned about 7 to 10 days prior to her unfortunate discovery. Law enforcement believed the horrific nature of the murder might have been inspired by the urge to sexually abuse her, even though the body was in a well-advanced condition of decomposition. Police questioned multiple suspects and relentlessly followed up on several leads. They experimented with non-traditional techniques, going so far as to use hypnosis to elicit further information about Shelley Ann Warner's kidnapping and tragic death. These attempts, however, produced no significant results, and the case finally fizzled out. Finally, decades later, a reluctant witness came forward motivated by a sense of duty and the bravery to speak up. This person named 3 people connected to Shelley Ann's case. According to detectives, The witness waited until 2 of the suspects had died before speaking out, because they were originally afraid of taking revenge on their family. Even though the 3rd suspect had disappeared over time and the other 2 had already died, this new information gave rise to new hopes for justice. Fairness. This information gave detectives a new lease on life, and they decided to reopen the case with the intention of bringing Shelley and Warner's story to life. Investigators discovered other witnesses and a wealth of fresh evidence as the investigation went on, all of which strongly corroborated the witnesses' first account. The case's credibility was increased by the growing body of evidence. While conducting their investigations, the investigators came across a shocking finding. As of 2018, the 3rd suspect who had previously disappeared was officially dead. Additionally, 2 suspects had died, one in 2001 and another in 2010. Cold case team member Dave Dossman underlined how the suspect's death led to a significant witness coming forward and providing vital information. The St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office declared the evidence against the 3 suspects to be conclusive in 2023, after carefully reviewing all of the statements and evidence that had been collected. However, officials were unable to press charges against the 3 suspects because they had all died. Since no charges could be brought against the accused, their names were never made public. Following the conclusion of the inquiry, law enforcement officials revealed that Warner's assault was not an isolated incident. Although Shelley and Warner was not personally acquainted with the suspects, she was somewhat acquainted with some of their relatives. Dossman's admission confirmed a harsh reality. Though it wasn't immediately clear, Shelley and Warner knew the suspects. Dossman clarified the relationship by saying that she would have known who these individuals were and vice versa. The chief detective revealed the sobering truth about the reasons for the delays as he thought back on the protracted inquiry. The perpetrator's intimidation and threats against possible witnesses halted the investigation. They scared not just the witnesses, but also their relatives. The case was reluctantly terminated after an agonizing 43 years, despite the fact that the culprits were never brought before the scales of justice. For the family, not even time has provided them closure. Shelley's sister is the only surviving link to a tragic history after her parents passed away. Although her sister took solace in the case's eventual resolution, the unfulfilled justice and lack of recognizable DNA on the evidence delivered to the lab acted as a somber reminder of what could never be recovered. If Shelley and Warner's wonderful life hadn't been taken so violently, she would have turned 58 today. This terrible tale concludes without justice being served, leaving a legacy of unresolved issues and a yearning for what may have been. Moving on to the next case. John Harris Jr. On February 4th, 1989, at around 4 in the morning, a man broke into an apartment in San Mateo, California. Then he entered the victim's bed with a knife. A bandana was draped over his face. After attacking her indecently, he stabbed her. After calling 911, the victim subdued her attacker by some means. Fortunately, the woman lived, but she was unable to identify the unidentified male. The suspect's DNA was taken from her body and preserved for potential use at a later time. Investigators identified the suspect via genetic genealogy in December 2020. He was recognized as John Harris Jr., age 55. The arrest occurred in February of 2021. Right now, he has a booking in the main San Mateo County Jail. A $500,000 bond has been posted for him. It is my wish that the detectives look into if he is connected to any further crimes. Moving on to the next case. Sharon Pryor. At the age of 16, Sharon Pryor was residing in Point St. Charles, Montreal, Canada with her mother. She was characterized by her family and friends as a trustworthy, amiable, and gentle adolescent who avoided difficulty. Her twin sisters mentioned that she cherished animals and aspired to work as a veterinarian. Sharon painted Easter eggs for the impending Easter holiday on Saturday evening, March 29th, 1975. Sharon left her house after dinner with her family to go to Marina's Pizzeria with pals, as was her weekend ritual. Sharon was scared to walk outside because she didn't want her suede jacket to get ruined because it had started to shower. Her mother gave her the reassurance that the jacket would hold up. Around 7 o'clock at night, A friend saw her cross the street in front of her house. She never made it to the pizza, even though it was just a 5-minute walk from her house. It was supposed by her buddies at the pizza place that she had gone to her boyfriend's hockey game after meeting up with him. When Sharon failed to return home later that evening, Yvonne, her mother, started to worry. On the weekends, Sharon would frequently go out, but she would always make it home by 11 p.m., calling her mother to let her know she would be running late. Yvonne was worried and called Sharon's pals, but they informed her that Sharon was not present at the pizza place. She then called her partner, but he had also not seen her. Yvonne called the police and reported her missing. Police, friends, relatives, and community volunteers all participated in the search, but to no effect. Yvonne appeared on television and publicly begged for her daughter's safe return. A beekeeper would discover Sharon's death in a field at Chimit Dulit and Guillemot Boulevard 4 days later. A buddy had called the beekeeper to let him know that his gate to the field was open. He would frequently shut the gate since the field was occasionally used as a landfill. He discovered Sharon's body and called the police as he was about to latch the gate. Sharon had been killed by beatings and sexual assault. She was discovered with her shoes, socks, sweater, and suede jacket on. Her underwear was discovered on a neighboring limb, and her jeans were discovered a short distance away. According to an autopsy, Sharon passed away about 20 hours before her body was discovered. Before she was killed, it is thought that she had been held captive for 3 days. Because Sharon was found clutching branches in her hands, police also thought that she might have been alive when her body was discarded in the field. About 15 feet from the crime scene, authorities discovered a tire truck, which may indicate that she was carried in a car before being dumped. Additionally, police discovered a size 8.5 shoe print next to the gate, indicating that a smaller individual may have been involved. At the crime site, police discovered a guy's shirt that had been used to restrain Sharon. The man appeared to be of a bigger build, weighing approximately 90 kilograms or approximately 200 pounds and perhaps standing around 6 feet tall. Police questioned if there were 2 suspects in the murder. From the crime site, DNA might be recovered by the police. A sliver of duct tape hanging from Sharon's hair gave the impression that she had been choked. Police conducted an inquiry and found that a woman had been attacked with a knife in the same area around 7 p.m. the night before Sharon vanished. The woman yelled, drawing attention from onlookers, and the attacker fled the scene. Some conjectured that when he was fleeing from attacking the previous woman, the same man might have bumped into Sharon and kidnapped her. The man in the lineup was selected by the woman who had been attacked just before Sharon vanished, but she wasn't positive it was the same man, so the police had to let him go. 6 years later, Tammy Leakey, a 12-year-old girl, vanished a short distance from the location where Sharon vanished. After a day, her body was discovered. She had been killed by beating, strangling, and rape. Subsequently, an FBI profiler would assert that the murders were committed by the same perpetrator or killers. For a long time, it was impossible to get a full DNA profile from the clothes discovered at the crime scene. But thanks to developments in DNA technology, a comprehensive male DNA profile has now been produced. Police forwarded the DNA profile to a West Virginia lab in 2019. Police quickly discovered that the individual they were searching for was related to the Romine family. Equipped with this evidence, Eric, the detective looking into the case, laboriously combed through databases linked to any previous crimes in the area where she was abducted or discovered. After searching through newspapers, public databases, and other information he could get his hands on, he eventually located Franklin Maywood Romine. Guy, who had resided in Montreal the year Sharon Pryor was murdered. Franklin and Sharon were barely 9 kilometers apart or less than 6 miles apart. Moreover, Franklin's physical attributes corresponded with the person who had made an attempt to kidnap the 23-year-old on Wellington Street. The investigator also found out that Franklin had driven a dark red Rambler with tires that were identical to the ones that left a tire print at the scene of Sharon's death. Franklin had a lengthy criminal history, both in the U.S. and Canada. In 1964, he was imprisoned in a penitentiary in West Virginia for an unrelated offense. He had fled the prison in 1967 and relocated to Canada, but in just 2 years, he had also accrued a criminal record there. He was taken into custody in 1974 in Parkersburg, West Virginia, after breaking into a home and assaulting a woman. 2 months after being freed on a $25,100 bond, he absconded once more, this time to Canada. He would go on to murder Sharon Pryor a few months later. Shortly after Sharon Pryor was killed in 1975, Franklin Romine was captured by Canadian border guards and extradited back to West Virginia. He was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison there for the sexual assault he had committed in the Parkersburg case. Franklin was never thought to be a suspect in the Sharon Pryor case. Sadly, he was never charged since he died in Canada in 1982, not long after being freed from prison in connection with the Parkersburg case. But authorities haven't been able to track down a death certificate that would have revealed more information about how he passed away. When his body was excavated in April 2023, it was discovered that his DNA exactly matched the DNA found at the Sharon Pryor murder scene. Sharon's mother, Yvonne Pryor, is currently 80 years old and still resides in Canada. Her whole life, she has been looking for her daughter's killer. The family expressed gratitude to the authorities on both sides of the border, citing what they called the miracle of science in locating the teen's killer. Maureen, Sharon's sister, encapsulates the family's viewpoint on this now closed issue. Even if you might not have returned to our home or Congregation Street that particular weekend, you have remained in our hearts and never will. Sharon, you are loved by us. May you now find true serenity and rest. Moving on to the next case. Diana, workers at the Wright City Rest Area in the state of Missouri found an unidentified torso near some shrubs on June 28, 2004. The victim's torso was unrecognizable due to the extreme brutality of the mutilation. It had no head, arms, or legs, so detectives had an extremely hard time identifying it. This cold case, which required 18 years of non-stop investigation to solve, would be detailed, along with how the police finally identified the torso and what happened to the victim. We are going to Wright City, Missouri for this case today. For outdoor enthusiasts, Wright City, Missouri is a little city that is sometimes overlooked. There is something for everyone in the area with the variety of outdoor activities available. Whether you want to unwind and enjoy the scenery or go on an exhilarating adventure, Wright City has everything you could ever want. The city has bathing areas, fishing holes, hiking and bike trails, and more. Wright City has an abundance of outdoor recreational possibilities, ranging from riding through its woodland trails to boating on Lake Calhoun. Its broad landscapes and historical buildings make it the perfect place for anyone looking for a true small-town experience. One of the biggest benefits of residing in a town like Wright City is the low crime rate. Knowing they are surrounded by a tight-knit community makes the residents feel safer at night. When a terrifying revelation rocked the small village in 2004, it seemed that this was not the case. The small hamlet of Wright City awoke to a sluggish morning on June 28, 2004. In town, hardly much was going on. Like every other day, a few workers were preparing to tidy up the picnic area near the Interstate 70 Wright City rest stop. Some were watering the plants while others were clearing up garbage. To make it easier for guests to sit in the picnic area, a crew of workers was in charge of pruning the trees and shrubs that surrounded it. They had no idea that the results of this cleaning would be so awful that it would take 18 years for even the police to handle it. Some of the housekeeping staff found an odd thing inside the picnic area's deep end while they were pruning the plants. The workmen discovered a carcass when they came closer to look at the weird thing. They were incorrect to think it was a mannequin at first. It was the torso of a woman. No whole body was present. The only thing the workers could see was a torso. No hands, no legs, nothing at all. They knew something wasn't right about this, and they alerted the police to the site. When the police got there, they saw that the woman's torso had 2 surgical incisions around her abdomen and was wearing a black bra. The marks were quickly interpreted by the authorities to be the result of a cesarean section or appendectomy. The cops dispersed and started irregularly combing the area in an attempt to gather more clues. Some police officers found a knife in a nearby sewer that had alien DNA on it while searching for clues. The DNA that wasn't the victim's was also found on the torso by the police. The only problem was that there was no way to identify the victim. Even though the police believed that this foreign DNA was most likely that of the murderer, the police failed in their exhaustive search of the entire city for more bits of the victim's mutilated body. It looked like every body part had been cut off and discarded at multiple distant spots from Wright City. Since they were unable to positively identify the body, the police were initially perplexed. There was only a black bra and a torso on the body. It had no hands, no legs, and no face. It may be possible to link the DNA of the missing torso with a relative. However, once more, there are no recognized family members when the body is unidentified. It was impossible for the authorities to visit every residence in Wright City and collect DNA samples because they had no idea if the torso belonged to a resident. The complexity of this case was astounding. Imagine having to identify a body without hands, legs, a face, a family, or even a house. The only way the investigation could have continued was if someone had come up to the police and said they knew the person whose body had been found near the picnic spot. But this is precisely what occurred in 2016 when local police officer Brian Barker was taken into custody and accused of committing crimes. Brian Barker acknowledged to the authorities that he had reported his sister missing in 2006, but that the incident had never been looked into while he was being held by the police. He said that the torso found in the picnic area in Wright City might be his sister's. Brian may have acted in this way because he genuinely loved his sister, or just wanted to help the cops get off the hook for some of the crimes he had previously committed. Since his sister had been missing for 2 years, Brian Barker went to the police station in 2006 and requested that they file a report. The police took action at the time, but after that, Brian's case was dropped because neither he nor the police knew where his sister might be. Still, Brian Barker's story did not finish there. Brian Barker was a notorious police officer. While carrying out his duties, he had broken numerous laws and would continue to do so for years to come. Between 2009 and 2014, the Edwardsville Police Department received multiple reports of burglaries related to businesses. The average number of these complaints was close to 24 every year. To make a long tale short, following Brian Barker's imprisonment, the number of complaints decreased to around 6 each year. It was because Brian was a thug in addition to being a dishonest police officer. His trick was to show his police credentials and threaten people while he was robbing or stealing. He was accused of stealing weapons, valuables, and breaking into houses nearby. The court sentenced 43-year-old Brian Barker to 40 years in prison for his offenses. In order to try to have his sentence lowered, Barker may have benefited from aiding the authorities with the unidentified torso investigation. For 10 years, the case remained unsolved due to a lack of clues to identify the found torso. Lieutenant Matt Schmutz of the Warren County Sheriff's Office revived the case later in 2014. And in 2016, investigators chose to give Brian Barker more time. They made an effort to match the torso with his DNA sample. The samples did not match, despite Brian's insistence that the torso belonged to his sister, and the authorities started to think he was lying to get a less sentence. Brian insisted that his DNA be tested again, and so it was, along with samples from other family members. Again, a new sample of DNA was obtained from the torso and sent for examination. DNA sampling is an extremely difficult procedure. The DNA of a father and his daughters might not match, but the father's and the niece's did. This was what had happened to Brian's DNA samples before. They had not matched the torsos before, but the match was made when other family members gave their samples. After multiple attempts to compare the DNA samples of the family members, Ashley Kinnear, Brian's sister's daughter, yielded the most meaningful matches. Given that the first unidentified torso was actually his sister, Brian Barker was not lying after all. At last, the authorities made progress in the case when they learned that Deanna Denise Howland was the owner of the unidentifiable torso. Following this revelation, a further significant problem surfaced. Deanna did not have a single surname or known home address. She had taken on many surnames due to her multiple marriages and the fact that she had 5 children with different fathers. A portion of Deanna Denise Howland's upbringing was spent in Edwardsville and Collinsville. Her father was a banker and a union organizer. She did not have a difficult childhood, but as she got older, things got more harder for her. She was also ensnared in the terrifying web of drug addiction. Diana eventually became one of those family members who left the house too often and frequently never comes back as time went on. Because she was an addict and drug dealers got more expensive as police stations spread around the country, she was unable to maintain herself. Diana seemed doomed for a life of hardship. She knew she would never be able to support her family, so she never stayed with them. For Diana, it was more important to support herself, but even that was becoming more difficult due to her drug issues. Diana, poor Diana, took the riskiest route so she could be on her own. She made the choice to become a prostitute. She believed that prostitution was her only means of subsistence. Diana has been involved with multiple guys throughout her adult life while using narcotics in order to increase her income. Because of her publicized lifestyle and profession, Diana had regular run-ins with the law. She was also incarcerated for a long period. Diana's daughter Ashley Kinnear claims that her numerous trips to jail made it nearly automatic for her to escape unscathed. Diana was a devoted mother who loved her kids no matter how she lived. When she was freed from prison, she would make time for her children and see them. She would eat with them and then go out to continue her dangerous hustle. Even though Ashley had spent the majority of her life apart from her mother, Ashley knew that Diana felt the same way about her. Even though Diana wasn't around very often, she said Diana never forgot her birthday and would call her each year. Prior to her disappearance, Diana had assured Ashley that she would see the play in which Ashley was performing. However, Diana did not appear the following day, and Ashley became aware that something was off. Diana Dennis Howland also went by the aliases Diana Kinnear and Diana Frolic in addition to her maiden name, Diana Barker. Diana was born in Belleville, Illinois, married in 1991, and had at least 2 children before filing for divorce from her spouse 4 years later. According to court documents, her relatives could not be found or declined to speak. Diana was cut off from her family and had a nomadic lifestyle. She was last seen in the regions of Alton Granite City and East St. Louis prior to her abduction in May 2004. The Missouri State Police are used to looking into the family history of missing persons. A genetic genealogy program helped solve the 10-year-old case of T.J. Emily's disappearance. On March 25, 1990, T.J. Emily went for a walk, but he never returned home. A case was started for a missing person in the same year, but nothing turned up. 2 years later, on March 7, 1992, a skeleton was found in an old abandoned building, a similar story to Diana's. The authorities failed in their attempt to identify the skeleton's DNA. Years later, when the case was revived, the police collaborated with the DNA Doe Project and NGO. They quickly determined that T's skeleton belonged to him, J. Emily, via a thorough examination spanning 2 decades. In 2019, yet another horrific case was solved with the application of genetic genealogy. In 1993, 9-year-old Angie Hausman ran away from her family and never returned. Her body was discovered in a protected area close to St. Louis. 9 days after she disappeared, her captor had left her there, and because her lips had been duct-taped shut, she eventually suffocated to death. A DNA sample was taken from Angie's cut pants and sent to a laboratory. Years later, the investigators used genetic genealogy to determine that Angie's killer was retired Naval Officer Earl Webster Cox. Going back to Diana's situation, the same thing happened here. The authorities tested the DNA of the murderer found on the unidentified torso, and on the knife left at the crime site after learning that the unidentified torso belonged to Diana Dennis Howland. DNA samples were taken from Diana's lower torso, and some of the sample was also found on the knife that the police had found in the sewer. 2019 saw the authorities take a DNA sample from the weapon. The samples were delivered to the lab to be inspected by scientists working on the genetic genealogy program by the police once they obtained the DNA. After running tests non-stop for nearly 3 years, the police were able to gradually narrow their search. And with the help of further advancements in genetic genealogy, they were able to find Mike A. Clardy, the culprit. Mike A. Clardy and his wife were living in Maryland Heights when he was discovered by the authorities. Furthermore, Mike A. Clardy had no vision. But did he not see Diana's horrific murder? No. Mike lost his vision after Diana was slain in an incident that had nothing to do with her. Mike acknowledged killing Diana on the evening of June 28, 2004, following his apprehension. It is important to understand that Mike was neither a criminal or a serial killer before Diana was killed. Never in his life had he been arrested by the police for anything, much less murder. So why did he murder Diana? Mike's account of what happened is that Diana, a prostitute at the time, frequently visited Mike's house on the 3500 block of Dixie Drive in St. and Mike would frequently bring her male clients. But on June 26, 2004, on one of Diana's trips, Mike and Diana got into a quarrel in the evening. The dispute surpassed all rational boundaries and Mike's fury caused him to go insane. Mike ultimately killed Diana and dismembered her body. Parts 1 and 2 were dumped at the appropriate city rest area, while the remaining pieces were dispersed over Warren and St. Louis counties. The authorities never found Diana's other body parts, despite their best efforts. Mike's family and neighbors were taken aback by his arrest and confession. Mike's neighbors couldn't possibly witness him in this situation. They were unaware that the 63-year-old blind guy would be behind such a horrific murder. Mike has been given a $1 million bond by the judge, and he will most certainly serve a life term. Diana's family story is undoubtedly a tragic one. Even more tragically, most of her family stopped thinking about her as soon as she disappeared, never realizing what terrible fate had befallen her. Her daughter Ashley Kenya will always remember her mother Diana and how much she loved her, even though society often links drug addicts and prostitutes with these negative connotations. Ashley was enraged when Diana's killer was eventually found and taken into custody. After nearly 2 decades, Ashley, at least, was able to find closure. Justice had finally been served, all thanks to the relentless efforts of law enforcement and forensic experts who never gave up on this case. While it couldn't bring Diana back or make her love for her kids whole again, it can serve as a message to all killers that their crimes will never go unpunished and that they will always have to face the consequences of their actions. Dr. Sneha and Philip. Kerala, India was home to the brilliant and fiercely independent young Dr. Sneha and Philip. Her disturbing disappearance in September 2001, in the hours before the 9/11 terrorist attacks, cut short her unwavering care for her patients, her curiosity in various arts, and her desire to see the world. Everyone who knew her in the Manhattan community and throughout New York City at large was left searching for answers in a sea of mysteries that left us all feeling lost in doubt. This analysis looks at Sneha and Philip's disappearance in the years leading up to one of the worst days in American history and the decades-long struggle her family waged to clear her name and ultimately preserve her heroic legacy. The goal is to present more compelling arguments based on factual data and situational analysis. On October 7, 1969, Sneha and Philip were born to doctors. Kerala, an Indian state located directly on the Malabar coast, is home to Kokil and Ansu Philip. Sneha became a part of a trio. Her brother, Ashvins, was born before her. She was first introduced to the Philip family not long before her parents welcomed their second son. This individual goes by Kevin. Even as a small child, the only girl got along well with both of her brothers, creating a playful connection that frequently involved lengthy days full of excitement and laughing. However, the Phillips family determined after a few years that their stay in Kerala, India, was coming to an end. Believing that moving to the U.S. would be the ideal option for both the Phillipses, a bright and growing family, relocated to upstate New York due to Kuchil's logic and career. After arriving, Sneha and the others made their home in Hopewell Junction, a Dutchess County hamlet and census-designated place near Poughkeepsie, New York. When Sneha finally arrived in America, she adjusted to the many cultures and lifestyles around her rather well. She developed a particular fondness for the beautiful arts in particular, and she was particularly drawn to writing, painting, and music. Sneha had a wide range of interests. Her artistic endeavors were just one aspect of them. Throughout her latter childhood, a number of her classmates and teachers noted how she combined a deep-seated empathy for others with an astonishing level of intelligence for her age. Sneha's altruistic tendencies persisted throughout high school when she made the decision to study medicine and eventually earn a doctorate. Naturally, there was some hesitation in doing this. Sneha continued to have a strong connection to the arts and thought about defying convention by choosing to major in painting or related field in college rather than official medicine. Ultimately, though, the arguments were won by the certain promise of a medical profession. Inspired by her father's medical career, Sneha enrolled in the Chicago School of Medicine in 1995, following her graduation from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. Sneha met Ron Lieberman, a Los Angeles transplant student studying 1 year behind her, while she was a fellow doctor-in-waiting at Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science, also known as RFS. Not just on a personal level, the two fell in love right away. Sneha discovered after a few chats that Ron was a fellow artist who performed in his spare time and loved music in general. Sneha, who also enjoys painting, saw that the two could combine their personal and professional lives, and they began dating. Sneha even took a year off from school during Ron's penultimate year at RFS in order to travel across the Italian countryside and graduate and enter the post-graduation stage simultaneously. Following their graduation from RFS, the couple relocated to Lower Manhattan's East Village district in New York City, where they both secured nearby internships. While Sneha was employed at the Cabrini Medical Center, discovered a chance at the Bronx's Jacobi Medical Center. In May 2000, Ron and Sneha tied the knot in a private ceremony in the Dutchess County home of the Phillips siblings. The event turned out to be really special as both families included elements of their Indian Christian and Jewish heritages. In fact, Ron gave Sneha a minu, a customary bridal jewelry given to brides in Malayali Christian traditions, at the wedding. This one had a diamond placed in the shape of a golden teardrop. That would be the same necklace that her parents had been frantically searching for in September of 2001. Their only daughter, who had once seemed full of promise, vanished without a trace when the World Trade Center Twin Towers were terrorized. Now let's look at the sequence of events that led up to Sneha becoming missing. Sneha and Ron, who had recently tied the knot, moved into a larger apartment in Battery Park City during the summer of 2000, just a few blocks from the World Trade Center. In the spring of 2001, almost a year later, Sneha receives word from her director of residence that her contracts will not be extended. After just a few months, she was hired by Staten Island Saint. That summer of 2000, Sneha was suspended from Vincent Medical Center for not attending her scheduled meetings with her drug abuse counselor following her treatment for alcoholism. Before the attacks on Friday, her mother went to see Sneha. They spent time together, had dinner, and watched a movie. Sneha spent the nights there and the day before she left. She mentioned that she wished she still had a closer relationship with her mother. On September 10th, Sneha appeared in court early in the morning and entered a not guilty plea to the allegation of making a false complaint. At 11 in the morning, Ron leaves their apartment on Rector Place for work, leaving Sneha alone. Sneha spends the remainder of the morning tidying things before her cousin Anu arrives on Wednesday, September 12th. Sneha repots white-purple orchids from Hawaii in the early afternoon and dries them in the bathtub. She texts her mother between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, chatting about Ron's guitar performance at a recent event at Jacobi Medical Center and her wish to see windows on the global restaurants on the rooftop of North WTC Tower, where a friend was being married in the spring of 2002. Sneha then changes into sandals, a brown short-sleeve dress, and ties her hair back into a ponytail between 4 and 5 p.m. Shortly after the clock chimes 5 times, she leaves. Sneha leaves her dry cleaning between 5 and 6 o'clock in the evening and goes to Century 21 to shop at a bargain mall. It's a short distance from the residences, just a few blocks past the Twin Towers. She visits the department store to get underwear, a fresh outfit, pantyhose, and clean sheets for the apartments. There's a transaction at that same Century 21 just after 6 p.m. using Ron's American Express credit card, which Sneha was allowed to use. She strolls to the store next door between 6 and 7 p.m. and purchases 3 pairs of shoes from the shoe annex. During the 2-hour shopping spree, Sneha is captured on CCTV inspecting the department store's apparel. This would be Sneha and Philip's final verified sighting. Gets home from work just before midnight later that evening. In addition to Sneha's absence, he observes that she has not left any voicemails, something she did not want her to do late one night. Ron checked on Figa and Carly, the two house cats, and made sure they were okay before turning in for the night on September 11th, 2001. Ron receives a missed call on his cell phone from a phone line within the apartment at 4 in the morning the next day. The only other person with access to the house is Sneha, but Ron claims he hardly remembers checking his voicemail at that time and doesn't recall ever receiving a call. 2.5 hours later, Ron awakens on his own to his 630 alarm once more. He is first irritated, but then learns that Sneha most likely just spent the night at her brother's or relative's house in West Village, which is a common occurrence. He hurriedly gets ready and takes the Uptown 5 train to Jacobi Medical Center to pick up the parts. Ron shows up for the 8 a.m., blissfully unaware of the impending disaster, just like all the other blissfully uninformed New Yorkers in the city. American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 carrying 92 people, crashes between floors 93 and 99 on the north face of the North Tower, also known as 1WC, at the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, New York City, 46 minutes later at 40 seconds past 8:46 a.m. After a short while, Ron departs from a conference at Jacobi Medical Center. When he comes out of the room, his colleagues are crammed around a TV. A news report about a jet crash into the World Trade Center, which is only a few blocks from his flat, is shown to him as he gets closer. Immediately, thoughts of snare cross his head. Everyone initially thinks the jet crash is an accident, but that quickly changes when United Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 767 carrying 65 people, hits between floors 7,785 on the south face of the South Tower, often known as 2WTC. At 9:03 in the morning, Ron calls his Battery Park apartment urgently about the same time, hoping to get through to Sneha, but no one answers. In case Sneha needs to get in touch with him when she gets home, he leaves his phone number on the voicemail. Ron then gets in touch with Sneha's mother and brother, who haven't heard from his wife either, following that fruitless attempt. In the meantime, the horrific September 11th events are still happening all around the country. In a span of 30 minutes, the World Trade Center's South Tower collapses at 9:59. Flight 93 crashes in Somerset County, Pennsylvania at 10:03, and the North Tower collapses at 10:28. American Airlines Flight 77 crashes into the west side of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. at 9:37 a.m. United Airlines Flight 93 is seized by its passengers from the hijackers, who are ostensibly headed to the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. At 9:57 a.m., Ron stays by himself and muses over all the possible endings for Sneha, while the chaos raging through Manhattan and other places decimates the entire country. His possibilities include becoming a victim of the World Trade Center attacks herself, being abducted, and being murdered. Ron decides around 3 p.m. to leave work and search for his wife after hours of tense waiting. Ron is compelled to hitch a ride with an ambulance that is traveling toward Ground Zero on 911 because of the severe traffic that occurs throughout the day in the New York City metro area. The squads had to maneuver across opposing traffic, making the hike take up to 6 hours, and Sneha was nowhere to be seen. Ron gets to Tribeca at 9 o'clock at night to see that the World Trade Center crash site has been blocked off by the NYPD. He can go through with his medical credentials and dash to his residences. Sadly, the front doors are locked owing to the local power outage, so Ron is forced to seek refuge at his friend's West Village apartments. On September 12th, the next morning, Ron gets up and returns to Battery Park, where he may at last enter the apartment complex. He goes upstairs, enters his apartment, and discovers that a bedroom window has been left open, and the entire apartment is covered in soot from the fall of the tower. Ron searches the floor for human tracks as he suddenly thinks he can take use of the soot. Unfortunately, all he discovers are the couple's 2 kitten-strewn paw tracks, indicating that Sneha was unable to return after the World Trade Center collapsed. Ron chooses to submit a missing persons complaint with the NYPD, one of the over 9,000 missing persons reports that were made in the immediate wake of 9/11 after conducting additional checks with Sneha's acquaintances and relatives. Over the next few days, Ron decided to go looking for his wife. When he contacted American Express to report the loss of his credit card, they informed him that the last transaction had occurred on September 10th at the Century 21 department store. Ron then made his way to that very store, where he hangs flyers for Sneha about missing people in and around the aisles. Ron gets a call later that week from a former worker at the Century 21 store, who tells him she saw Sneha on the evening of the 10th. Ron is also informed by the employee that Sneha was with someone else in the store that day, and she thought the other person was another Indian woman. Ron returns with this information to Century 21, where he is given access to 3 weeks' worth of security camera footage. At this point, he discovers the CCTV image of his spouse shopping for clothing, but in every clip when she appears, she is by alone. Ron recruited private investigator Ken Gallant after waiting for the NYPD to start their investigation and being angry with their uncaring attitude about her 911 fates. At first, the investigator thought it was possible that Sneha had used the assaults on the World Trade Center as a pretext to flee her personal problems and begin anew in an unidentified location. This notion, however, is short-lived as Gallant and Ron concur that Sneha most likely returned to the apartments on September 11th, witnessed the assaults in real time, and made the decision to head to Ground Zero and use her medical experience to help the injured right away. Although her remains were never found, this is most likely the place where she passed away. When enough proof is gathered, Ron brings this to the attention of the police. He discovers that the NYPD is conducting a separate investigation into her disappearance because of her unpredictable behavior and criminal past, leading them to believe that she was the victim of foul play rather than a 911 call. In 2003, Lieberman objects to the NYPD's conclusion of his wife's investigation and maintains that she should continue to be recognized as a victim of the 911 incident. He also requests access to the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund in exchange for his efforts to find his wife and try to bring her home. The NYPD submits these results to the courts hearing Ron's claim. However, they finally determined that there is insufficient evidence to establish Sneha was a victim of the World Trade Center attacks. And in January 2004, her name and the names of 2 other individuals are struck from the official list of deceased. Disbelieving, Ron and the Phillip family fight valiantly to challenge this decision, claiming that the police falsified their conclusions by using circumstantial evidence and family testimony. While Sneha's disappearance was not a direct result of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the defense contended at the appeal hearing in the late winter of 2008 that it was highly likely given that her route home that morning would have taken her directly past Ground Zero at the moment when the Twin Towers were first hit. As a result, there was more conjecture because Sneha was in the area and her status as an official victim of the worst day in contemporary American history was reinstated. Notwithstanding the decision, Sneha and Phillips's tale has been one of doubt rather than possible bravery, blaming her early adult troubles on her status as missing and alleging that Ron Lieberman and her relatives took use of her disappearance for personal financial benefit. Naturally, the majority of the 9,000 missing person reports that passed through law enforcement in the days and weeks following the 9/11 attacks included the regrettable disclaimer that the majority, if not all, would discover evidence and clues lost in the cracks. It was just too chaotic and hysterical to conduct appropriate investigations. Not to mention the fact that a large number of these allegations are either duplicates or cases where the victim was discovered by the police or the victim's family to be one of the assault's own victims. If there's any silver lining, it's that a large portion of New York City has copious amounts of CCTV and security cameras in every nook and cranny throughout the metro. The problem with this scenario, of course, is that a lot of security cameras were either turned off or left unattended on the morning of September 11th and in the days that followed. In an attempt to unravel the 9/11 conspiracy, local, state, and federal authorities in New York City made every effort to confiscate as much video as they could. They had no idea, however, that despite their delays, these preservation efforts ultimately benefited the smaller studies just as much. This is the exact circumstance that affected Sneha and Phillip's search and offered the crucial hint for determining what might have happened to her on September 10th evening or on September 11th. Upon conducting an investigation into Sneha's disappearance, private investigator Ken Gallant discovered surveillance footage from the main lobby of the Rector Place apartments in Battery Park, where the couple had lived for approximately a year. The recordings demonstrated that at 8:43 a.m. on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, a woman entered the lobby of Rector Place, made her way to the elevator, stood for a brief while, and then left. Sadly, these cassettes are not available to us. Nonetheless, They were included in the official case files of King Gallant and submitted to the courts during the judge-led argument of Sneha's case. According to the documents, the angle of the sun's rays coming through the lobby window starkly contrasted with the quality of the CCTV picture. Yet the woman's fundamental features could still be seen. According to Ron's testimony, the person in the picture had his wife's mannerisms, had a ponytail or hairdo that was comparable to Sneha's at the time, and even had clothing that looked like Sneha's from the earlier Century 21-second dirty clip. There are other indications that the woman might be Sneha. Another important hint is the time of day. Ron stated in court that Sneha would usually be home between 7:09 a.m. and 8 a.m. the next day if she didn't come home after a night out, which wasn't too often. The timestamp, which is around 8:43 a.m., follows the pattern exactly, despite having only seen the woman's case file and never having met her in person. An NYPD investigator who also gave testimony during the court proceedings even went so far as to declare he thought the woman was Sneha Phillip. The main refutation of the assertion is that Sneha would have been clutching bags or other goods after returning to the flat for the first time since her shopping excursion, which the woman in the security tape isn't seen carrying. But this could be the reason the woman exited the foyer at Rector Place after spending a minute or two there. If Sneha was the person, perhaps she realized she had left her Century 21 luggage at home or at the train and hurried out to get them when she got there. Some believe that Sneha's departure from the lobby was actually her response to hearing the first plane crash into the World Trade Center's North Tower, even though it was only a few blocks away, and that the timing on the CCTV system was inaccurate by a minute or two. Clocks and CCTV systems are often programmed with the most precise timestamp available. It is impossible to prove either way, though. Furthermore, it's reasonable to doubt the footage's veracity in terms of timing, given the enormous panic around 9 to 11 that soon followed its recording. Whatever the case, the hidden security tapes are the most significant lead into Sneha's disappearance, and contribute to the innumerable ideas that have been developed since Ron's first attempts to track down his missing wife. Now let's discuss the most widely accepted ideas of Sneha's disappearance. In the years after America's darkest hour, a variety of ideas regarding Sneha's and Philip's status have spread like wildfire through the internet and investigative organizations. The majority of them ideas conclude that Snero was a victim of the 9/11 disaster and had some connection to it. But the most radical notion deviating from that line of reasoning came from the NYPD, the organization in charge of tracking Snare down. Following months of contemplation, Ron decided to use all available resources to locate his wife, which is why he paid Ken Gallant for his services. This was caused in part by the NYPD's extraordinarily heavy caseload after the 9/11 attacks, as well as their initial lack of interest in SNIA's case. They refused to look into it further, insisting she was most likely a victim of the Twin Towers attack. Ron was initially shocked, thinking his wife couldn't have been at the towers and certain that something had happened to her the previous evening. Fortunately, both guys changed their minds and realized that Sneha was most likely a victim of 9/11 thanks to Ken Gallant's expert understanding and investigative work. In an odd turn of events, however, as Ron and Gallin arrived at this conclusion, law enforcement reverted to Ron's initial hypothesis. It turned out that Sneha had caused her own disappearance. Thus, the NYPD was looking into her disappearance from that angle. Naturally, Ron demanded a thorough explanation as any bewildered widower would, having recently come to terms with the devastating reality that his wife and 3,000 other people perished on September 11, 2001. Was there something he missed? It turned out that the NYPD had been compiling a fairly extensive and thorough history of Sneha's life, one that was centered on her legal troubles and other personal problems that Ron had long since ceased linking to her disappearance rather than her medical degree or her love of painting. Beginning with Sneha's last days as a resident of the Cabrini Medical Center, where she completed her internship, these in-depth reports were written. Since Sneha was considered an intern, she was not eligible for a direct termination. She was, however, advised that her contract would not be renewed because of problems resulting from her alcohol usage and tardiness. Sneha continued to socialize outside of the medical center with her former co-workers in spite of this. Shortly after receiving the unfavorable news, Sneha went out to a bar with her friends one evening to socialize and have a few drinks. Sneha, on the other hand, had a violent argument with one of her younger friends and ended up spending the next 12 hours in jail. Sneha allegedly filed a criminal complaint with the police alleging that one of the interns had touched her improperly and groped her. This in turn was also taken into custody and charged with forcible touching. However, following a brief probe, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and the NYPD decided to dismiss the charges against the alleged intern. Instead, they made a complete 180-degree turn and charged Sneha with a misdemeanor for filing a false complaint. If you find this hard to hear, try to envision how Sneha felt at the time. Furthermore, she was informed by the prosecution team that if she merely withdrew the first complaint, all charges would be withdrawn. She was not at all comfortable with this. She was not going to give up on her assault tale and stop advocating for herself. She so rejected the DA's offer and persisted with her first assertion. Sneha was consequently placed in handcuffs and given a one-night jail sentence, which she complied with by spending the night in meditation with another prisoner. But the NYPD reports didn't end there. They even went so far as to incorporate Ron's contribution to Sneha's life, or rather, its seeming absence in the equation. Official reports state that Sneha was found to have been spending whole evenings out in Manhattan with random people and people she would meet at the several homosexual LGBTQ+ friendly clubs, including Julie's, Henrietta Hudson's, and Meow Mix. The problem was Ron was aware of his wife's late-night antics. He informed her it was okay as long as she called to let him know she was safe and in good hands, even though he didn't know the identities of every acquaintance she made. Furthermore, Ron informed the NYPD that Sneha's choice of bars had no bearing on their marital status. Ron provided an excellent answer, stating that Sneha had no interest in being approached at regular bars, particularly after the intern episode had such a negative outcome for her. But the NYPD's fabricated charges didn't end there. A purported interview with Sneha's brother, who claimed to have told police he had witnessed Sneha having sex with his girlfriend at the time, was also included in their files. However, when asked about this during the appeal hearing, Sneha's brother angrily denied ever having said these things, much less taking part in an interrogation concerning that particular incident in general. Most damning of all, according to the police records, Sneha and Ron got into a heated verbal altercation on the grounds of the courtroom on September 10, 2001, following a court procedure for her criminal charge appeal. Ron stormed off, leaving Sneha stunned on her own. The issue is that Ron claims this never happened. He claimed that although they had a purposeful conversation, nothing got out of hand and that he left for work as usual following his morning's proceedings at the court. Given all of these fabricated incidents and circumstantial evidence, the police concluded that Sneha had vanished on her own volition. Either she would fall into problems for her late-night antics, or she would use 9 to 11 to stage her own death and flee in order to start over, running away from the sins that followed her. But Ken Gallant had already ruled out a staged death. Though he conducted the appropriate research, he had the same first suspicions. Searching Stina's computer files, Gallant saw nothing that would typically indicate someone looking into beginning a new life. She also stored her passports, glasses, driver's license, and nearly all of her credit cards in the apartments. The most obvious clue was the glasses. She hardly ever traveled outside of the boundaries of New York City without them. Could Sneha have been killed on her night out, as the NYPD initially believed, if she had not fled? Though it's not likely, it's also not impossible. Sneha had already spent the evening drinking and socializing at bars and new acquaintances' apartments throughout the city. Not only did she know who not to hang out with, but she also clearly understood the risks that women in large cities confront when they go to bars. Had she not known how to protect herself and noticed the warning signs, she would not have done what she did. Additionally, there was no illegal activity on September 10th night that would have called for a murder investigation. There were no unresolved murders, missing Indian women, bar shootings, or documented abductions. Of course, on September 11th, there were hardly any crimes reported at all. And at the end of the day, there had only been one unsolved homicide. A pattern of disappearances outside the obvious Twin Towers fatalities in the days preceding and after 9/11 has likewise not been found in the New York City area. Actually, there is just one contested report of missing persons during the week of September 11th. That is Fernando Molinar's situation. When Molinar spoke to his mother over the phone on September 8, 2001, about his new employment at a nearby pizzeria close to the World Trade Center, that was the last time anyone saw or heard from him. Although his actual start date was never disclosed, he hadn't started yet. A Dutchess County judge rejected the petition in January 2004 to list him as an official death, even though he appeared to 911 as a clear candidate for victim status. Sneha and Molinar are not really related, other than the fact that they were both immigrants to the United States. In regards to Sneha and Philip's case, we concur with her husband, Ron, private investigator, Ken Gallant, the Philip family, and as of late, the whole Dutchess County courts that Sneha died as a consequence of the World Trade Center attacks on September 11, 2001. In addition, we think Sneha was under a lot of pressure to start a new life and job, go to medical school, and deal with many important issues in her life. But it was not the kind of incident that would make someone want to start over and throw everything away. It wasn't Sneha's medical license or capacity to practice that was lost. It was her employment. After all, she had another job already. It would have been more logical for Sneha to spend the night at the locations that brought her the greatest joy. That morning, she had to handle a tense court session, and felt it was preferable to stay out after shopping all evening. Who knows where she went exactly? Asking people where they were on September 10th isn't exactly fair, because for some New Yorkers who were present during the event and do not understand the fascination or desire to talk about it in the same way that the rest of the world often does, talking about 911 is an extremely triggering topic. Although regrettable, it's a valid issue and it deserves our respect. All we can say is that it makes perfect sense that Sneha would have run to Ground Zero on Tuesday morning to assist in any way she could after witnessing the attacks taking place at the Twin Towers. The first indication is clear. Sneha had dedicated the better part of 6 years of her life to following in her father's footsteps and becoming a doctor. She wanted to continue his legacy of kindness and concern for everyday people because she was moved by it. When it came right down to it, she wanted to use her skills to help keep more people alive and well because she loved them. Sneha would have been among the first to put her head down and take action if a jet had crashed into the Twin Towers and there had been an obvious crisis. At the time of her disappearance, Sneha was also thinking about the World Trade Center. Do you recall the September 10th instant messaging exchange she had with her mother? She mentioned visiting the windows on the World restaurants located on the 106th and 107th levels of North Tower 1 WTC. The motivation was a spring 2002 wedding that Sneha would be attending. A friend of hers was being married at the windows on the World venue. That gave rise to the desire. When Sneha saw the top of the North Tower on fire on the morning of 9/11, it's conceivable that this was the first thing she thought about. Maybe it was her excellent friend who was in serious danger up there. We don't know if Sneha was the woman in the security video from the apartment lobby because we haven't seen the tapes or Sneha herself. But based on a few distinct characteristics, we can infer from the descriptions given and the admissions made by her husband and an investigating detective that the woman did seem to be Sneha. In the end, there were indications that Sneha was still alive just 1 minute before to the 9/11 plane crash. There were no clues or indicators after those awful hours, and Sneha and Philip vanished by dusk, just like almost 3,000 other people had. There is still a possibility that Sneha's remains will be recognized. During the cleanup work following the 9/11 attacks, investigators gathered almost 22,000 individual pieces of human remains from Ground Zero. Many of these have not yet been compared to DNA provided by victims' relatives who want to obtain confirmation of the whereabouts of their loved ones. Snares is among the 1347 victims of 9/11 whose remains have not yet been located. Could happen that a match appears one day. But as time has gone on, the process of identifying victims has become more and more difficult because a large portion of the DNA either repeats itself or is missing from the system of samples that have been submitted. Even though it's unlikely that we will ever learn the precise circumstances behind Sneha and Philip's deaths, we can still honor her memory as the compassionate physician that she was, a compassionate idealist who aspired to restore health, cure illness, and improve the lives of everyone she encountered. She made the greatest sacrifice in order to fulfill her mission when she passed away. Doctor, it's not clear how many people. No matter how many people Philip looked after that morning beneath the smoking towers, her legacy will endure. We will exhibit our memories and restore honor to the names Sneha and Philip in commemoration of the 3,000 souls lost, and the numerous lives affected by the terrible consequences that have since taken root after September 11, 2001. Lam Corwin. Lam Corwin was the first serial killer to strike Hong Kong in 1982. Although he worked as a taxi driver during the day, he was also known as the Rainy Night Butcher and the Jars Killer. Over the course of 7 months, he killed 4 young ladies, burying their bodies under his family's couch and preserving body parts in jars. Every murder was more horrific than the last, involving everything from body parts amputation to asphyxia. Every one of them was documented in spooky films. This man, who was he and what deranged ideas motivated him? How could these women have become his gullible target? Lam Corwin was born on May 22, 1955 in the center of Hong Kong and had a challenging childhood with 2 mistresses, a legitimate wife and 10 kids. His father, Lam Wylock, led a difficult existence. This set the stage for Lam's turbulent upbringing. Lam experienced severe treatment during his formative years. His father violently abused both him and his birth mother when they were living in Malaysia. When Lam was a child, his parents divorced, but it didn't make things any easier. His father's violent attitude stemmed from a horrific event in which he banged his head against a wall, breaking Lam's skull and rendering him unconscious at the age of 2. Following a stay in Brunei from 1957 to 1962, where Lam shared a dormitory with his father's half-siblings and mistresses, he went back to Hong Kong. Even though she did well academically in elementary school, there were difficulties when she transferred to Ritchie Middle School in Sham, Shui Pu for junior high school in 1968. Due to his father's work, Lam had to balance 2 jobs in school, which had an effect on his performance, particularly in maths. By 1970, his scholastic ranking had declined due to the pressures of managing his father's motorbike shop after school. Severe therapy marked the further collapse of his relationship with his father. Lam also started running away from home a lot as a result of this. It had set in as a pattern in his life, one that lasted into middle school. Lam had formally begun working in his father's motorbike shop after completing his secondary education. Later on, he went on to learn how to service air conditioners from a relative. All of this, with its familial issues and difficult moments, had prepared Lam Corwin to become the enigmatic figure he would later become. He'd been banished from his house in early 1973 after a falling out with his father. He forced a woman into a public lavatory on Hock Yuen Street and hung home with a knife, and then groped her indecently there. His arrest resulted from this incident. After a medical evaluation, it was determined that Lam had mental health problems, which made him ineligible for a trial or jail. He was thus given a treatment term at King Shan Mental Hospital. Following 102 days of medical care, he was released from the hospital and chose to adopt the name Lam Jokum. By the time he was 19, his family had become aware of his strange preoccupation with the feminine form and his stash of pornography kept within a metal ammunition box. His family did make an effort to assist him, but it didn't seem to be working. His behavior became increasingly unsettling as a result of his inability to be satisfied by these behaviors. After acquiring a Polaroid camera, he started capturing clandestine photos of ladies from beneath lavatory doors, which in turn led the women to pursue him down the street. Later on at their Quan Hong home, he was caught glancing at his sister as she undressed outside the bathroom. The family decided to move to a new location in Tak Wa Wan as a result. He shared a room with his younger brother at their new house, using separate bunk bed compartments to divide the space. There was an arrangement. Their possessions were to be kept apart, unhindered by the other side. He got his taxi driver's license in 1978 and went by Lam Corwin to begin his official taxi driving career. He was switched to a night schedule about 1980, which meant that his family would only get to see him every 14 to 15 days. He then became suddenly interested in photography in 1981, which led him to start studying this art form. But since he didn't have a dark room at home to print color images, he went looking for a photo studio. He enrolled in a photography course offered by the Chinese YMCA of Hong Kong at the Waterloo Road Association in order to avoid being suspected. One of his classmates was using Photoshop Tim Shou Shui. made up a tale saying that she was a part-time photographer who worked in a mortuary and needed help taking autopsy pictures. Amazingly, his account was approved, and in order to prevent colleagues from becoming alarmed, the fellow student created Lam's images. When he drove a night taxi for a year, his mother saw a marked shift in his behavior. He began to disregard personal hygiene, declining to take a shower or change into new clothes. His mother even saw him wandering home in the middle of the night, like a sleepwalker, as his demeanor turned hopeless. At the age of 27, Lam changed on the dreary night of February 3, 1982, from a simple peeping Tom to something more evil. One day, when he was working as a taxi driver in the Tsim Sha Tsui neighborhood, he was looking for clients who were coming home after a night out. And this is where the situation became gloomy. Chan Fong Lan, a clearly drunk woman, emerged from a restaurant at around 4 in the morning in dire need of a ride. Many taxi drivers refused to take her because of the condition she was in. Lam, who didn't appear to care, welcomed her inside his taxi and offered to drive her home despite this. Halfway through the ride, the inebriated woman asked to halt. Lam also opened the door to throw up as she braked close to a petrol station. Uncertain about her location after this unpleasant incident, she requested Lam to head back the other way. Lam later admitted that he had been reluctant to murder her at first because he was disgusted by her vomiting. But that changed when he decided he could take no more. Still in the Tsim Sha Tsui neighborhood, he went into a garage, circled to the passenger door, and strangled the girl with an electric line. He drove to his house at 5 in the morning when he usually ended work and parked in front of the building. He hid the body in a big bag and moved it across the pavement inside his flat building as the street was empty. When Lam went by, the night watchman who was sleeping on a cot in the entry hall was still asleep. He moved as stealthily as he could into the apartment, concealing the body beneath the sofa. Lam stayed in his bed for several hours, pretending to sleep while he waited for his family to leave after breakfast. He woke up and got ready in his room after his brother and parents left the flat. Taking 500 yuan out of the victim's pocket, Lam went to the street and bought a power saw. To ensure that everything was well protected, including the baseboards, he covered the floor with plastic. He began to dismember the unfortunate woman's body after placing it on the plastic. Even though he took great care to ensure that no blood was left behind, some of it ended up splashing into the walls. He continued to dismember the victim's body for hours, taking pictures and recordings of the entire procedure. He then gave the videotape the name Serious Secret. He dissected her body into 7 parts, sealing the head, limbs, and torso in a plastic bag after wrapping them in paper. The thing that disturbed me the most was that he preserved the genitalia in a Tupperware container using rice wine. He meticulously cleared the crime scene, wiped the walls and floor, and rolled up the plastic sheet, making sure that nothing remained of the horrific events that had occurred. He stayed hidden from onlookers, making multiple visits to deliver the body parts to his taxi, feeling confident that he had removed all traces of the unsettling deed. He took his car to the new areas. He halted when he came upon an empty area on the banks of the Xinguan River, close to Chaten. He was determined to find a remote location to dispose of the body. He removed each parcel from his trunk one at a time and tossed them into the river, making sure no one was watching. The bundles were carried out to sea by the murky waves. The torrential rain carried the limbs from Lucky Plaza to the Bel Air Gardens neighborhood where they drifted. On the radio, more than a week after the horrific deed, Lam had learned of a terrifying discovery. On the Xinguan River's bank, a limb had been found. More body pieces were found in disturbing ways in the following days, allowing the police to piece together the awful puzzle. Tidal patterns were utilized by investigators to calculate the moment the body was dumped into the river. Notably, one of the arms had an uncommon tattoo, a knife through heart. That was uncommon for a woman to have at the time. This is what helped them figure out who the victim was. It was Chan Fong Wan, age 21. Even after the authorities issued a public call for witnesses, they encountered regrettable difficulties. The taxi driver did not approach, and the license plate went unnoticed by Chan Fong Lan's friends. Lam didn't learn about the body parts discovery for over a week. The mother of 2 children and nightclub hostess, Sim Sha Sui, Chan Fenglan was identified by the authorities as the deceased person. The graphic details described Chan's night out with her friends and sister, her taxi ride home, and the terrible end Lam Corwin dealt her. Lam Corwin had been opportunistic in his first murder, but he had planned his second one very carefully. Being a perfectionist, he was determined to be more organized. He chose to use professional equipment rather than a power saw because he was aiming for surgical precision. He had read up on knives, blades, and scissors, and had even gone so far as to buy specialty surgical instruments and multiple bottles of formaldehyde. Formaldehyde was a colorless, strong-smelling chemical that was used for disinfection and preservation. 3 days after buying his apparatus on May 29, 1982, Lam had taken another victim. He succeeded with his second target, a pub employee. This time he picked Chanwon Kit Kulai and used an electric cord to strangle her before escorting her home. He waited in bed, like before, for his family to get home from work before beginning the grisly chore of dismembering the body. Lam had carefully planned the room and given it careful thought for days before acting. In order to keep the floor clear of bloodstains, he had placed a sizable tray underneath the body before getting his video camera. Investigators found that he had positioned the tray beneath the family's parakeet cage after reviewing the footage again. Lam displayed remarkable competence as he dissected the body with meticulous care. After he had done slicing it apart, Lam snapped another photo of each bodily part. After much deliberation and numerous nighttime excursions, he eventually discovered the ideal location for disposing of the body. This time, he packed the body parts inside a large plastic bag and put it in the trunk of his cap. He drove to Hong Kong Island through the tunnel early in the morning. The selected location, a heavily forested residential neighborhood called Tai Hang Road, was located 20 minutes east of the city center. He parked in a conspicuous area of the street and then began to struggle to get the bulky bag out of the trunk. He took it a little distance up to the railing where he watched it tumble into a muddy gully. As he hurled the body over it, thought back on that night's events often in the days that followed, not out of regret or guilt, but rather out of a desire to better himself. 2 weeks later, he made another attack. On June 17, 1982, Ling Saw-wan, a 29-year-old nightclub cleaner, got off the job at 4 in the morning and got into Lam's taxi. She soon suffered her terrible end. Lam took her corpse back to his house and performed a horrifying set of acts on her. He recorded his horrifying deeds, taking pictures and filming them, giving the recording the title Operation Rainy Night. Lam recorded the act of dismemberment with his camcorder set up on the bunk bed, using the selfie feature to capture an uncomfortable degree of detail over what he had done before. This time, he proceeded to cut open the abdomen, remove the bowel, and even try to taste human flesh before giving up on the idea since it made him queasy. Then, on Tai Hang Road, he abandoned the severed limbs in a Hessian bag, starting yet another horrible chapter in this gruesome rampage. Lam had grown bolder with every crime. He had been meticulously planning his next heist at this period. Knowing the pubs in the Tsim Sha Tsui neighborhood, he was aware of the locations where women frequently waited for his cab by themselves. He had intended for the next victim to be a woman from a higher social class, but his first 3 victims had been what he had dubbed terrible girls. He purposefully chose a young woman who looked naive, and it was Ling Weisong, 17, this time. On July 2, 1982, Lam had discovered her outside the Tsim Sha Tsui Hotel. Before the final examinations, she had gone to a party at her high school, but she had made the decision to leave after supper. To make sure she got home safely, her high school pals had put her in a taxi. After guiding her to a remote road, Lam parked his vehicle. When he took her wrist and chained her to the front seat, the youngster was horrified. He couldn't have gone home that early. It was just 9:30 p.m. However, he had another purpose for wanting to keep her in his vehicle. Unexpectedly, he desired companionship. He desired to speak with her. He was lonely and in need of company, so he spent hours tiling up with questions about her life in general, her family, and her religion. All in all, was having fun with her company. That was insufficient to derail his ghastly scheme. Around 4 in the morning, the adolescent dozed off. At this point, Lam began using the electric cable to strangle her. After that, he carried the defenseless girl's lifeless body home and went about his daily business of waiting for his family to vacate the flat. He recorded after he made sure no one was home by mounting his video camera on a high shelf. This was the footage that the police would eventually play in court. The video was quite unsettling. Lamb was acting inappropriately and necrophiliacally with the dead body in the video. It was significant to observe that the young victim's thighs had been burned by a lamp that had fallen on them earlier when he was setting up the lighting apparatus to record his actions. In order to later refer to it as the fourth operation, he also recorded it on camera and took pictures of her. Then he dismembered the body just as he had done with the victims who would subsequently return to torment him. He left the body on Taihang Road thereafter. On August 10, 1982, Lamb attempted to expand the picture of his fourth victim that had been severed. By coincidence, Lamb's friend's Photoshop enlarger was broken, so Lamb's negatives were sent to the Mong Kok branch to be magnified. The branch's picture editors discovered disturbing elements in the processed images during the manual enlargement process, suggesting a possible connection to the mutilation of a human body. Despite his suspicions, the shop's supervisor called the police because of elements such as an image of a severed breast and a burn mark on the victim's thigh. The Kowloon Regional Homicide Squad was given the case by the police once they received the report. Detective Sergeant Lee Dak-kwan guided detectives in getting statements from the Tsim Sha Tsui and Mong Kok branch clerks. Obtaining the negatives and pictures, comprehensive examinations were carried out by the Scientific Forensics Department's forensic officer. The corpse in the photo had been dead for less than 3 hours, according to an analysis of the skin and blood color. The dismemberment style indicated a lack of medical anatomical understanding on the part of the culprit, ruling out the notion that they were instructional images. The standard green sheet used for autopsies was conspicuously missing. Experts in forensics also verify that the images were taken directly from a real corpse rather than from printed material. Plus, in one picture, a tiny droplet of water mirrored half the face of a girl who looked like Ling Wai Sim, who had disappeared on July 2nd. The police decided to make an arrest after coming to the conclusion that Lang had been murdered based on the findings of the Scientific Forensics Division and the medical examiner. Sergeant Lee had led the crew in an ambush at the Photoshop early on August 17th. He asked the clerk to combine a few more pictures with Lamb's collection of 13 and encouraged him to talk with Lamb about the pictures, where they were taken and why they were enlarged. The intention was to capture the dialogue and acquire proof. Lamb arrived by cab at around 6 o'clock in the evening to pick up the pictures. In response to his friend's request, he carefully examined each picture and clarified that the larger versions would be utilized for courtroom presentations, especially so jurors could see the contents more clearly. According to Lamb, he worked in several mortuaries on a regular basis. Sergeant Lee revealed his name, verified the pictures, and made the payment. He then arrested Lamb. At first, Lamb made up a false narrative, claiming that the images belonged to a purported four-eyed man from the Oriental Daily that he was going to see at Takuwan. Investigations, however, showed that there was no such individual. As a result, the authorities moved quickly to acquire a search warrant so they could examine Lamb's home in the allotted 48 hours and gather tangible evidence. They would have had to release him otherwise. In Lamb's cabinets, they found surgical instruments, personal belongings, preservatives, anatomical books, and severed body parts, including the dead women's breasts and vaginas. Additionally, his taxi was seized and searched by the police, who also left a notice on the windscreen indicating that it was involved in a crime and instructing not to have it towed. After the car was examined further, evidence was found in the glove compartment, including wire and handcuffs. There were also 2 holes in the back of the front seat, which were probably made by one of the dead women's high heels during a struggle. Investigators allegedly uncovered a vast archive that included 696 negatives, 1,500 color slides, and 1,900 carefully classified photos that showed Corwin's victims at different points in his crimes. His careful documentation greatly facilitated the police inquiry. The body parts of all his victims were eventually found by authorities, allowing for their identification and return to their individual families. To help with the inquiry, Lam Corwin was taken to the police station with his father and younger brother. Authorities thought that Lamb and his brother had not acted alone, given their small living area and the amount of evidence found in their single bedroom. After being detained and questioned extensively for 3 days, Lin was freed. The younger Lamb stated that he had little contact with his brother because of their divergent schedules and that he was unaware of or did not participate in the incidents. Their father and younger brother pushed Corwin to make it clear that they had nothing to do with it in order to expedite their release. Lamb's mother went to the police station also, hoping to talk her son into confessing. Corwin helped the police identify the victim's body parts, but even with their assistance, the police continued to suspect that the younger Lamb might be involved. As a result, the two brothers were brought before the Sampokong Magistrates Court and charged with 4 charges of murder. After that, they were moved to the Su Lam Psychiatric Center for evaluation. In keeping with the younger brother's repeated claims of innocence, he was ultimately freed following the 6th hearing on the grounds of inadequate evidence. In the meantime, a medical examination determined that Corwin was competent to stand trial, demonstrated an extraordinarily high IQ, reportedly over 130, and was of sound mind. After the establishment of prima facie evidence, the matter was forwarded to the Supreme Court for a trial. On March 3, 1983, the trial began and a large crowd gathered outside the court to see Lamb's behavior. The case's specifics, according to the authorities, were too upsetting for women. To guarantee a fair trial, 7 carefully chosen male jurors were chosen. Only the jurors, judges, and attorneys were permitted to watch Lamb's videotapes, so ordered to avoid shock. The organs of the victim were also kept out of the courtroom. The prosecution called witnesses throughout the trial, including members of Lamb's family, the police office, Photoshop employees, and forensic and scientific specialists. Acknowledging the strength of the evidence against him, Lamb attempted to reach a compromise by confessing to manslaughter in return for a shorter sentence. But this appeal was turned down. The jury was instructed by the court to choose between manslaughter and murder charges, rather than discuss Lamb's culpability. The trial featured testimony from 5 psychiatrists and delves into arguments over Lamb's mental health. 2 questioned his self-control, while 3 implied an infatuation with women. 18 days later, on April 8th of that year, the judge gave the jury instructions to find that Lamb had some degree of control over his conduct during the crimes. Following more than 3 hours of discussion, the jury unanimously concluded that Lamb was guilty of murder. Insane. Lamb was originally given a hanging death sentence, but thanks to the governor's pardon, his sentence was reduced to life in prison when Hong Kong abolished the death penalty in 1984. Following his conviction, Lamb was first housed at Stanley Prison before being moved to Shek Pik Prison, where he was known to the other convicts as a Lamb. He was a reserved man who avoided talking about his history and preferred to be by himself. According to reports, he was paid little, kept to himself, and didn't socialize much. He took part in Catholic and Christian classes while incarcerated and read newspapers, medical, and religious materials. He didn't have any family visits, although he did occasionally get visits from church volunteers. Newspapers and books littered his cell, and he became well known among the other prisoners for his expertise in purple star astrology, a kind of Chinese fortune-telling. Prison guards asked him for advice. Lamb applied for parole in 2018 after serving for more than 34 years at the age of 62, which alarmed the public. The parole board reviews the case every 5 years. However, at that time they decided not to grant parole due to worries about the possibility of repeat offenses. Additionally, according to reports, Lamb was observed by some inmates making elaborate displays out of cockroaches that were kept in matchboxes. Lamb's mother testified during the 1983 trial regarding the physical abuse her oldest son suffered as a youngster. She described how Corwin's father had been abusive, even inflicting significant head damage on the boy when he was only 2 years old, which left him with 2 black eyes. She had been abused as a child in the household as well. Experts have connected serious brain traumas sustained as a kid to psychological problems later in life, including necrophilia. According to reports, Lamb told a doctor that he thought God had given him the go-ahead to carry out the murders. There is still uncertainty around Lamb's behavior after the probe. Investigators were baffled as to why, despite having the appropriate equipment, He chose to process films at a Kodak store. Others surmised that having been dangerously close to being arrested once, he may have secretly wanted to be arrested. The gruesome results of the autopsy and the manner in which the victims were mutilated suggested the presence of a skilled killer. Nevertheless, because of the case's publicity, Lamb's family had difficulties in spite of these horrifying facts. They tried to sell their flat, but the high profile of the building made it difficult, so they were forced to stay. After the investigation was closed, the police destroyed all of Lamb's videos and images out of concern for possible public attention. Nevertheless, a few of the victims' organs had an unexpected outcome. For instructional reasons, they are kept at the Wan Chai Forensic Medicine headquarters. In a somber acknowledgement of the lives lost to his son's malice, Lamb's father dedicated a memorial tablet at Yuanjin College on November 16, 1986, hoping to atone for his son's transgressions. We must pay tribute to these 4 innocent women whose lives were sadly lost as we come to the end of Lankar Wan's eerie tale. The story of Lam Corwin serves as a chilling reminder of the intricacies of the human psyche and the terrible outcomes they can have. These are clear reminders that mental health needs to be given more attention and that a greater knowledge of it is necessary. In the maximum security Shekpik prison on Lonto Island, Lam Corwin, now 68, is serving a life sentence for the gruesome killings that rocked Hong Kong in the early 1980s. His reputation as the first serial killer in the city was cemented into history. At the age of 27, his horrific reign came to an end on August 17, 1982, the day of his arrest. His eerie post-crime customs, such as concealing victims under the family sofa and cannibalizing body parts, led to him being dubbed the Rainy Night Butcher and the Jars Murderer. Such unsettling behaviors provide a terrifying image of a troubled mind. Magali Part, on January 17, 1982, Eric Bertrand, a truck driver, and Evelyn, a housewife and stay-at-home mother, welcomed Magali into the world, was raised in the town of Langans, and was the oldest of 5 children. When she was 12 years old, her parents got divorced in 1994, and her father then moved to Switzerland to start a new life and get married again. Nevertheless, she stayed in touch with him, and they had a close relationship. Feeling hurt by the separation, Magali decided to stay in France and live with her mother. She met Jeffrey Part, a 23-year-old, on July 12, 1998, at the age of 16. Jeffrey was raised in a violent home. Jeffrey was placed in foster care for a portion of his childhood, while his father, Patrick, struggled with alcoholism. But as an adult, he had made amends and put his connection with his father back together. He had just spent a few days in jail after his ex-girlfriend accused him of domestic abuse when he first met Magali. After finding out about Jeffrey's past, Magali's mother voiced distaste for the young guy. After a falling out between mother and daughter, Magali moved in with her father and started working as a caregiver at a retirement community. The 18-year-old Magali wed Jeffrey in 2000. After relocating to the town of Ornex, Magali started working at a do-it-yourself store, and her husband found work as a painter and decorator. Magali fed Jeffrey breakfast on March 26, 2001, before he departed for work. That day, he wasn't scheduled to be at work, but for unknown reasons, he either chose to go in or was requested to. While they were eating, Magali informed him that she intended to walk their Rottweiler puppy to a convenience store to get cigarettes. It was just a 2.5-mile journey there and back. However, when Jeffrey got home at 4:30 from work, he found that neither his wife nor his new puppy were there. Since Magali had prepared breakfast, the kitchen had not been cleaned up. The 19-year-old was usually a tidy person who cleaned up after herself. So this was really strange. Jeffrey called Magali's parents, who had not seen her, out of concern. When he arrived at her job at around 5 o'clock in the evening, he discovered that she had not reported sick and had not shown up for her afternoon shift. After that, Jeffrey reported his wife missing at the police station. After that, he went back to his house and enlisted the aid of a friend with an ATV to assist him in his search for Magali. In order to get some rest, they decided to end the quest at around 5 in the morning. Around 11 in the morning, a young man who was picking mushrooms next to his uncle's farm found the body of a woman. She had been burned and was just half clothed. The man believed at first that someone had dropped a mannequin, but upon closer inspection, he saw that his assumption was incorrect. After he ran to his uncle's farm, they made a police call. Investigators recognized the deceased as 19-year-old Mag parties using the report that Jeffrey submitted. And personalized jewelry engraved with the couple's names and wedding dates. They found a chocolate bar wrapper, a knife with its blade wedged into a tree, and a cigarette but next to the body. They found a gasoline-filled Jerry, kin 300 meters away. After analysis, it was discovered that the cigarette but belonged to a Moroccan brand that was only available in Switzerland. Interestingly, investigators discovered no evidence of a fire at the site where Magley's body was discovered, indicating to them that she was killed elsewhere and her remains were subsequently disposed of in the woodlands. 2 days after Magley disappeared on March 28th, an autopsy was performed. She had been assaulted, sustaining 12 fractures across her body. The medical examiner was unable to ascertain the precise moment of her death because she had been burned later. In addition, Magley's cause of death has never been made public. Additionally, the ME found sperm within the 19-year-old's body, indicating that she had engaged in sexual activity 48 hours before to her passing. But there was nothing to suggest that she had experienced sexual assault. The ME discovered a prescription drug for anxiety inside her veins. Investigators were never able to locate a prescription for the medicine in Magley's name, and neither Jeffrey nor her family was aware that she was using it, even though Magley didn't smoke this brand. Further examination of the cigarette, but that was found at the site, revealed that her DNA was present. Even stranger, investigators discovered that the cigarette had been thrown away following the 19-year-old's passing. It also prompted law officials to speculate about the likelihood of manufactured scenes. Magley's possessions were not found with her death, and have not been found again in the years that have passed. However, the Rottweiler puppy showed up 5.5 miles from Ornix in the town of Kosvej, unhurt and hungry. The puppy was clean and dry even though it had been raining between the 26th and the 28th. She had the scent of Magley's fragrances too. She lost her leash, which has never been found, even though the dog might have interacted with the offender. Jeffrey received her back from the police instead of having her examined for forensic evidence. Following Magley's last known actions, the investigators discovered that the 19-year-old had gone out with 2 pals the day before she passed away. Investigators learned from one of the acquaintances that Magley had said her that year's birthday present of underwear was from Jeffrey's father, Patrick. Magley checked her voicemail and shut off her phone at 10 o'clock that same day. The man's uncle, who discovered her death that morning, said that his dogs had been barking non-stop for some time, maybe sensing someone in the woods. This happened at 2 and 5 in the morning. Regarding his role, Patrick doesn't seem to have ever addressed the fact that he gave lingerie to his daughter-in-law. Jeffrey dismissed the accusation as untrue. On the 26th, the day of Magley's disappearance, Patrick says he went to the couple's home at 10 in the morning to get the mail, but she wasn't there. The reason Patrick's mail was at the couple's house is unknown. Someone tried to withdraw about a 400 from an ATM on the 26th in the town of St. Jean-Pied at 1 p.m., but they were unable because they had entered the incorrect PIN. But this person also had Jeffrey's credit card, so they took a 35 out of his accounts. It seems that the unidentified person knew his PIN. The specifics of what happened are unknown, since we were unable to locate any information that would have explained how the murderer had gotten Jeffrey's credit card or whether or not he had reported it missing. Magley was in this same town on the day of her death between 9:30 and 11 a.m., according to 3 other eyewitnesses. Her family doesn't know how or why she came to be here. The 19-year-old didn't have a car, therefore it was a very lengthy walk for them to get Smokes on foot. Nonetheless, every eyewitness has acknowledged that they could not be positive that the young woman they saw was Magley. Magley's case has not received much media coverage throughout the years. Her family has been dissatisfied with the investigation's lack of progress and has regularly expressed their suffering to the media because the murder happened close to them. Given that the murder happened near the Swiss border, journalists there started to show an interest in the case and start discussing it, eventually exposing multiple shortcomings on the part of the police. They said that photos of tire tracks discovered at the scene had been lost, DNA samples had been lost, and then found again during the investigation. And the police had been so convinced that Magali was the victim of a random attack that they had not looked into other options in detail. The intensity of the attack suggested that the 19-year-old was the target of great anger. However, their automobiles were not inspected and friends, relatives, and co-workers were not appropriately questioned. Law police also thought that Magali had been seen that day in a different place by the eyewitnesses. They therefore did not look into alternative hypotheses and firmly felt that she had vanished at the time of her last sighting. Jeffrey, Magali's spouse, was excluded from consideration as a suspect due to his unwavering alibi and non-existence of 3 years after her passing in 2004. It was found that the 19-year-old had missed multiple days of work in the months before the crime. Nevertheless, this information was unknown to Jeffrey and the other family members. 2 years later, Patrick and Jeffrey were detained by the police and interrogated. In the end, they were freed because there was insufficient evidence to connect either man to the crime. Although Jeffrey has never disclosed the identity of the attacker to the public, it is said that he knows who they are. When Magali vanished, according to his father, who was questioned over the lingerie episodes, he was at home. His alibi's degree of tightness is unknown. Since then, there have been very little updates on Magali's situation. Eric, her father, organized fundraisers in 2015 to enable the family to employ a private detective. The private investigation company confirmed to media what they already knew. The police made numerous mistakes during the initial investigation and might have overlooked important details as a result. Magali's body was excavated in 2016 to conduct more analysis, but no meaningful results were obtained. Jeffrey, Magali's husband, remarried and had 4 children with his new spouse after she passed away. He committed suicide on September 15, 2018. Magali's parents are unsure on how to handle his suicide as well, whether it sprung from sorrow over losing Magali or from guilt. His new wife claims the murder haunted the couple for the whole of their marriage, despite the fact that he made no reference of his murdered wife in his suicide notes. Fingerprints were found on the cigarette, but that was recovered from the crime scene after a re-examination in 2020. But they belonged to an unidentified person. The prints was too strong for Jeffrey or his father Patrick. The case is still unresolved. Moving on to the next case. Patricia Chupko Bender's Susan Robin Bender, Patricia Chupko Bender's only child, was born on November 27, 1970 in Modesto, California. On April 25, 1986, 15-year-old Susan left her family's home to spend the weekend at her friend's beachside home in Carmel. She strolled by herself to the Greyhound bus station at 10th and G Street. While Susan was waiting for the bus, she ran into several friends. She told them about her trip to the shore and that she would be back in a few days. After their conversation, Susan called someone on the payphone at the depot. A full-size 1977 Ford van with an olive green appearance pulled up 10 minutes later. Susan got into the vehicle. This is where Susan was last seen. It was common for a 15-year-old to enjoy this much independence in the 1980s. Patricia Bender, Susan's mother, assumed her daughter had made it to Carmel safely and was having fun with her friends. When Susan failed to make the customary phone call home, her mother became concerned. She reported her daughter missing on May 1, 1986. The police came to the conclusion that Susan had met a horrific end quite fast. A detective informed the local newspaper, "We have specific evidence that suggests foul play was involved in Susan Bender's disappearance." Susan's mother told the same newspaper that even though Susan had run away from home twice before, she had always come back pretty fast. Patricia mentioned that our relationship had been going well for a few months before she disappeared. She showed no indication that she intended to flee. She said that Susan's clothes, diaries, and phone book had been found in the possession of an unidentified male subject of interest. Patricia said, "I fear that a man who was questioned by the police but was never taken into custody attacked her. They had a ton of circumstantial evidence against him, but they decided not to take him into custody." Susan's disappearance was never considered voluntary by the authorities. Detective Richard Rodinier informed a journalist in 1987 that he thought Susan was definitely dead. Rodinier worked on the investigation until he retired in 2000. In a 1999 interview with Susan's mother, the police claim that in the absence of a body, is not much they can do. Detective Reidenhorst stated that Susan Bender simply vanished off the face of the planet in that same year. The most bizarre aspect of this case is that no one has ever come forward to reveal what happened to her, and no information about her has arisen over the years. In 1999, young ladies in the surrounding Stockton region were also the target of two childhood friends from Linden, California, Lauren Herzog and Wesley Skirmentine. One could speculate that Susan was one of their victims. Many of their victims are still unknown. Even though the authorities were unaware of it, it's probable that the men were involved in Susan's kidnapping, even though she vanished while they were busy carrying out their nefarious plans. Their victim-focused approach was congruent with Susan's disappearance. But after years of research, Susan's case had never been linked to the crimes of Skirmentine or Herzog. The two bad companions went on a rampage between 1980 to 1990. Several ladies may have been among the 15 or more individuals they slaughtered. Susan's case, meanwhile, remained unresolved for nearly 40 years. Investigators spoke with friends and relatives who had fought to keep Susan's tale intact. Sandy Silveria, a friend of Susan's, remarked in 2021, "Where is she? What happened to her? Whoever did this needs to be held responsible." In an attempt to locate the long-lost teenager, the Modesto Police Department announced in October 2021 that they had revived the investigation. "We found possible areas of opportunity in this case review that could help advance this case. This includes using technical breakthroughs," the agency said in a statement. "We also believe that considering the circumstances surrounding the crime, there may be unidentified individuals who have knowledge of crucial information regarding Susan's disappearance." In the years since Susan disappeared, investigators investigating into cold cases in Modesto had anticipated that additional witnesses might feel compelled to come forward. The police agency said in a statement from 2022 that it was important to remember Susan was a small child living with a family. "Unfortunately, it has taken the family 36 years to get justice or closure. It is our duty as a group to assist in bringing some sort of resolution to the situation while still working for justice." At last, the Modesto Police Department announced Raymond Lewis Stafford's arrest on Thursday, August 17, 2023. On August 15, 2023, Lewis, who is currently 76 years old, was taken into custody in Wills Point, 50 miles east of Dallas, where he had been living for almost 5 years. Stafford appeared to be living in plain sight for many years. Detectives were able to acquire an arrest warrant on August 10th, but the Texas Van Zandt County Sheriff's Department didn't show up at his house and take him into custody until Tuesday. After being captured without incident and being put into the Van Zandt County Jail, he was charged with Susan's murder. More details about what the Modesto police think occurred to Susan were not disclosed. While he awaits extradition to California, Raymond Lewis is now being held in custody in Texas. How precisely the detective focused on him as a possible suspect is unknown. Modesto police have been posing several unanswered questions to the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, but they say they don't have any further information to provide. Newspapers and local radio stations got in touch with the Stanislaus County District Attorney and the Modesto Police Department to inquire about what transpired prior to the suspect being taken into custody. However, they did not hear back. Regarding Susan's cause of death, whether her body could be located or the new evidence that led to Raymond Lewis's indictment, none of this information was made public. In a press release, Modesto police praised the California Department of Justice, the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, and multiple Texas authorities for their support during the difficult and lengthy investigation. It said that the resolution of Susan Robin Bender's case was made possible by these agencies working together. Almost immediately after they began to suspect foul play, detectives had a suspect. Lewis was arrested 1 month after Susan vanished on suspicion of committing a different burglary, according to court records filed in Stanislaus County. At the time, authorities used the green van to find Lewis. His name had not been released to the public at that point. They found out throughout their inquiry that Susan's mother, Patricia Bender, had had a brief collaboration with Raymond Stafford Lewis. At the time, Patricia claimed she suspected that after contacting their home phone, Lewis might have grown close to her daughter. Patricia briefly worked for Stafford Lewis at his security company in 1985, according to court documents. They also mentioned that she had dated Lewis a few times. Susan was familiar with Lewis. At the bus stop, Susan had been seen getting into his rented van. She allegedly stepped into his van without hesitation, according to her acquaintance who was at the bus stop the day she disappeared. In the 1980s, Raymond Stafford allegedly confessed to killing a woman by strangling her with a wire or cable and burying her close to the Big Oak Flat Yosemite entrance, according to a former resident of Stafford's home. He said that he drove to a campground near the Big Oak Flat entrance to Yosemite National Park and excavated the grave, according to court records that were retrieved. The 38-year-old Raymond Stafford filed to run for Modesto City Council in the months after Susan vanished. In July 1985, he told the local newspaper that his criminal past was just the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time when they asked about it. According to his arrest documents, he was operating an unregistered private investigation business while donning a badge designating him as a private investigator. Stafford stated that the primary goal of his campaign was to pass legislation protecting children from predators. "We don't waste any time pursuing those who are bothering our kids," he said. Unsurprisingly, he failed to win an election. 5 months later, in December 1986, Stafford was found guilty of setting a company on fire after he acknowledged making a fraudulent police complaint. He allegedly staged a kidnapping in order to avoid appearing in court. In 1994, he came back on a law enforcement's radar. He was registered as an offender on the offender registry under the identity Greg Tunningly for the abuse of a 13-year-old girl in California. New court filings identified the individual as Stafford. Patricia Bender revealed that after learning that the two had a covert relationship, she had always assumed Stafford was the cause of her daughter's disappearance. Patricia said, "I've known since the beginning when my daughter went missing. I've known all along that he was the one responsible. The investigators disregarded my statement to them." Patricia went on to claim that the idea had been a part of her for the preceding 37 years. She continued, "To be honest, I felt like I was lost. It was as if I were a wandering dead woman. It stings to hear other people talk about their kids and grandchildren." Patricia stated that the recollections of her 15-year-old daughter served as her source of inspiration. She thought about Susan's gregarious personality. She was a hilarious person. Patricia explained that she was simply a normal teenager trying to figure out who she was. Patricia Bender was tenacious, but her hunt for her daughter had been agonizing up until now. She spoke about needing to rely on her religion. She said, "I'm grateful. I'm relieved that the system has finally decided to do something and stop keeping me in the dark." Those closest to Susan hope to locate her in order to give her the send-off they have always felt she deserves. In the last act, her mother finally admits that she has never had trouble forgiving Stafford. "It may sound strange to say, but I have moved past his cruelty toward my kid. Since I don't want to bear that weight for the rest of my life, I really have." Patricia said this arrest has cleared a big cloud off her shoulders. "I'm not really excited about how the trial will go at this stage. All I want to do is find Susan's body." In her final statement, she stated, "My message is a simple one. Now pay attention to your kids." Moving on to the next case. Karen Moore? On June 26, 2001, the day before her birthday, 52-year-old Karen Moore, a Caucasian lady from Davie, Florida, left her house at 7 p.m., never to return. On the following day, Christina, her 8-year-old daughter, would return from summer camp in honor of her mother's birthday. But her mother would not be present to see her. Where could Karen have disappeared to? Was her disappearance connected to any illegal activity? When will she come back? Up until now, Christina had spent a long 22 years searching for the answers to these issues. Greetings and welcome back to Mystery Detective, the channel dedicated to narrating the stories of some of the most notorious unsolved cases in the United States and abroad. We are looking at a cold case that was unsolved for 22 years before being solved in 2023. Join us as we start to solve this mystery. Davie is a small suburban hamlet in Broward County, Florida that combines the energy of Western-themed attractions with the coziness of a tight-knit community. The city's year-round sunshine, pleasant climate, and easy access to beaches or draws for both visitors and residents. Davie is well recognized for accommodating college students because it is the hub of multiple university campuses. Davie has a wealth of leisure activities, a top-notch school, and a welcoming community. Our case begins here in this lovely city today. Thomas Stewart Moore and Olga Charlotte Moore welcomed a daughter into the world on June 27, 1948. They christened her Karen Elizabeth Moore. Pam was the name of her sister as well. As a child, Karen enjoyed hiking, sailing, cooking, and playing the piano. Travel has always been Karen's passion, even as a small child. It never occurred to anyone that she would go and never come back. She graduated in 1968 with an associate's degree in art and in 1979 with a bachelor's degree in science with a nursing concentration in 2001. 53-year-old Karen Elizabeth Moore and her spouse were going through a divorce. A restraining order was in place against him. Their 8-year-old daughter Christina was given full custody by Karen. Karen was employed as a nurse at the Boca Raton Retirement Community, Edgeway Estates, before to her abduction. She also never wavered in her resolve to providing Christina with a solid upbringing, even though she worked full-time. She sought to see that Christina enjoyed the best possible years. Christina also remembers Karen as a devoted mother. Karen made time for Christina despite her job as a nurse by taking her to the zoo and doing other things together. All she wanted was for her daughter to grow up happy and healthy. But this family's cheerful picture will soon give way to a depressing one that was full of unsolved mysteries. Karen was due to turn 53 on June 27, 2001. Christina had come home from Girl Scout camp to celebrate with her mother, but Karen wasn't there to greet her. Christina realized something wasn't right when Karen didn't come pick her up. Given that Karen worked as a nurse, it made sense that she would be distracted at work. But Karen was always there for her daughter, and if she had to go to work, she would have sent someone else to pick Christina up. It was an unusual circumstance. As the day went on, the story that followed expanded by the hour. The last time anyone saw Karen was on June 26, 2001 at 6:30 p.m., when she hired her neighbor's son to mow her grass. She drove away from the house in her white 1999 Saturn at around 7 o'clock in the evening. No one knew where she might have gone or why she had gone outside. Karen's sister Pam, Kleiss, phoned the police after waiting for her for hours, and she still hadn't arrived at the residence. Pam claimed that she had requested her former husband to pick up Christina from camp the day Karen disappeared before she departed for work. Before leaving the house, she later had a brief talk with the son of her neighbor. What transpired following these episodes is unknown. She had a job to report for the next day. Karen worked at Edge Point Estates, a retirement community, for 8 years, and her executive director, Keith Cradle, noted her dependable and responsible work history. Would have alerted the establishment if there had ever been an urgent duty because she was such a passionate worker. Everyone knew how much Christina meant to her, even herself. It was obvious that Karen had not left on her own initiative. Was there more at play here, or was this just a terrible accident? As suspicions grew, so did the police's limited resources in their search for Karen Moore. The first thing they needed to do was track her car. Karen disappeared inexplicably while operating a white 1999 Saturn four-door with the license plate due to who there was an Indiana State University sticker on the rear of her automobile. The public had access to all of this information's details. Detective James Frank, whiz of the Davie Police Department, received a tip that a woman had soon reported seeing the identical car in South Miami-Dade County. But the story was unsubstantiated and unsupported by any other witnesses. In a desperate attempt to advance the investigation, the police released a missing poster detailing Karen's looks. The posters featured her with brown hair, brown eyes, and glasses. Her height was given as 5 feet, 4 inches. In an attempt to locate Karen, the police were looking for leads, but they were not finding any. The initial survey of her house was enough to warn of terrible news. At home, her phone, suitcase, and whole clothing were found. Upon careful examination, there were no signs of forced entry or trespassing at her residence. Although the detective deduced that Karen had to have left the house willingly, the reason behind her departure remained a mystery. The public was notified by Detective James Francois that the police were looking into Karen Moo's phone and banking records. When there was no activity on her credit card or bank account, he instantly ruled out theft or robbery. This suggested that Karen was in a very bad place. She would have required money to sustain herself as she still had all of her needs at home. Karen's family wanted the police to search for her using a helicopter, but they were unable to do so because they did not know the route Karen may take. Karen Moore had vanished from sight entirely. Days progressed into weeks. Weeks into months and months into years passed while Karen's family waited for a return. Despite the Moore family and the entire police department displaying missing person posters with incentives. Years and years went by and Karen never returned. Her daughter, Christina, married and had children of her own. But Karen's whereabouts from that day remained a mystery. On January 6, 2023, Britton Lockhart, a scuba diver, and the owner of the YouTube channel Depths of History, John Mike Sullivan and Michael Rodriguez, who were leading the Sunshine State sonar team in their investigation of the surrounding water bodies in Broward County. They used state-of-the-art sonar equipment to find an automobile in a Davie retention pond. When Michael's underwater sonar devices began to light up, the entire team understood they had hit automobile wheels in the water. Before discovering the automobile, they spent roughly 15 minutes looking for it. When Britton swam down to investigate, she found a license plate buried 3 feet below the surface of the muck in an exposed trunk. They were convinced they had found something important, but they didn't know exactly what it was, or if it had anything to do with any previous incidents. Britton Lockhart immediately called the Davie Police Department. Even though Karen vanished inexplicably 22 years ago, the Davie police were still aware of her whereabouts. When they arrived at the location the next day, they had to send the divers back into the sea. After being pulled out of the water, the automobile was taken for further examination. The car that Karen was driving at the time of her disappearance fit the description. The license plate on Karen's car was found to be dusty. It was a noteworthy discovery in this 22-year-old instance. Pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Later on, it was established that Karen Moore had been inside the car when it crashed into the lake after 2 bones were found inside. It was finally revealed to them what had become to Karen Moore. Despite the fact that the entire search operation was broadcast live on YouTube, Lockhart and Rodriguez were not allowed to talk about the case's particulars. Due to suspicions of foul play, the search teams and the Moore family were not allowed to speak with the police about the case. Christina has finally found closure on the whats, hows, and whys of her mother's disappearance. Questions that have persisted for 22 years. Karen disappeared without explanation, leaving Christina in her family's care. She would never be able to duplicate the love and intimacy she felt with her mother. She had a lot of ups and downs in her early years. She even went into foster care for a while. During these moments, she would miss her mother and hope that she would be discovered or returned to her. Every young girl desires and hopes to have their mother by her side at every stage of life. My personal birthdays, the dates I got engaged, married, and had my 2 children. Christina stated in a sorrowful interview that they never got to know their grandmother. Christina had definitely had a close relationship with her mother. Even after all these years in 2021. She made a post on TikTok complaining about how she wished she had spent a little more time with her mother. After 22 long years, Christina finally found out what had happened to her mother. Christina was thankful to the police and search teams for enabling her to bring Karen back home and give her a peaceful burial. Even though she was unable to find all the answers to the issues that had plagued her for years. The case of Karen Moss's disappearance is still being investigated. Police and Davie emailed Fox News Digital to let them know that they had spoken with the detectives but couldn't say further because they were worried it would jeopardize the investigation's prospects of being successful. Then came the next set of urgent questions when Karen's body was found in the pond. How did Karen end up falling into the pond? What was this crime's intended outcome? If the police's suspicions are true, then who was responsible for the 22 years of pain that Christina and the Moore family endured? Now that Karen has returned home after 22 years away, there is yet hope for her. There was some degree of success, thanks to Sono Systems' technology developments and the dedication of the police department. Though at this point the answers are unclear, Karen's justice may be just around the corner. Never be reluctant to share your knowledge. Your expertise might be essential to unlocking a long-standing enigma.